Hi everyone, can you hear me well? Hi, my name is Arnaud Legon. I worked at Google Cloud France as a customer engineer. So my role is kind of a cloud architect for tech companies, including startups. So for example, I'm helping Algolia in their deployment to the cloud regarding GKE. So for the people that are new to Kubernetes, you're going to have more insight about why it's useful, where it's coming from, and as well what's kind of the trend with Kubernetes and why it's kind of so cool. So I think it's going to be great on that point of view. And how Google is providing you the best tool, meaning GKE, Google Kubernetes Engine, in order to host your Kubernetes environment. So most added value of Google for a lot of people is all the different applications that you can access. So for example, Maps, Gmail, YouTube. But the real key value of current Google deployment is infrastructure underlying Google. So right now, it's kind of more than decades of deployment regarding the infrastructure and all the learning that we've done internally in order to scale from a few servers to the biggest infrastructure on Earth. Right now at Google, everything is about containers. You're going to see after. There's been more than a decade that we have kind of initiate the concept of Linux containers and how we are processing them at scale. Everything runs in a container at Google. So your Gmail inbox, when you're going to go to Maps, everything is going to be in a container. Even virtual machines. So for the ones that are going to GCP, Google Cloud Platform, and running virtual machines on the cloud, at Google Cloud Platform, your virtual machine is inside the container itself. And it's about 4 billion containers per week. That's kind of the fun fact regarding how big is it. So when we look at the timeline in a few words, so it started all in 2006 when our infrastructure started to grow rapidly. And we decided to kind of expose best practices in terms of framework, but as well in terms of best practices in order to manage better containers at scale. So we've pushed Kubernetes, as that has been unveiled in 2014. The V1 has been published actually in July 2015. And GKE, so the managed version of Kubernetes, has been published 1 month after. So it's already Kubernetes almost 4 years old now, and our managed version almost 5 years as well, 4 years as well. For the ones that are not familiar with what is a container, just in a few words. So people used to deal with bare metal servers. So basically, you host your server, you have full access to it. Then we move to virtual machines, and now people are moving to containers. So you're just packaging your application with your dependencies, and it kind of be able to be spawned kind of everywhere in an environment. So that's kind of the idea of adding abstraction regarding the physical machines that will serve your application. What is Kubernetes? I've already kind of answered the question, but just to let you know, the key point of Kubernetes is just that it's not only an open source project, it's that it's part of the CNCF, so the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, meaning that it's supported by the entire industry, not only by Google, so by Twitter, over tech companies, Red Hat as well. And those companies are as well contributing to the project. So you have the community and a set of different companies going to Kubernetes. That's why a lot of workloads are going to Kubernetes. And Kubernetes is, by the way, the first project regarding engagement on GitHub. So the big question that someone asked, why are people really excited about Kubernetes? So in a few words, it allows you to merge all your running applications from an operations perspective. So if you're an apps, you're going to manage a cluster. You won't care about the underlying infrastructure. So that's kind of a pretty cool thing. So your cluster will run different applications from all your different teams, developer teams in your company. One thing that is often associated to Kubernetes is that it's scalability. So we're going to cover that later in the presentation, how we're going to help you to scale your application and serve your customer without any downtime, and to make sure that you're able to scale the demand. And as well, from an ops perspective, you're going to have a better control of your deployments and the versioning of your application. You're going to be able to easily update your application seamlessly. The key thing, two things that are really important. So it's the things that Pierre-Gilles mentioned as well. The first thing is Kubernetes is an abstraction of your infrastructure. And we're going to see that after. You won't care about your machine. at all with Kubernetes. And the second thing is that Kubernetes offers a declarative set of APIs to orchestrate your containers. So it's going to be easier from an ops perspective to manage all your deployment at scale without having to scale your ops team. So that's kind of the key factor of Kubernetes. For the ones that have done containers in the past with Docker or other platform, you have to handle a lot of things when it comes to manage containers at scale for your different applications. And it can get very complicated. So from that point of view, from that perspective, Kubernetes is a toolbox that allows you to manage a lot of things. And the key differentiator between other container orchestrator is that Kubernetes has been done in an opinionated way, meaning that with the best practices that we've done at Google during the last decade about managing containers, we've made some choices that we have implemented into the development of Kubernetes. So Kubernetes offers you all the toolbox of those different features, and after we're going to see how is it easier with Kubernetes Engine. But getting started can be a good challenge. I'm not sure how many people in the audience created a cluster. Raise your hand. Okay. Is it easy? Okay, thank you. So it's not that easy, despite a lot of people saying that Kubernetes is an easy way for managing things. That's an extract of the GitHub by Kelsey Hightower, who works at Google actually as a developer advocate for Kubernetes, for GKE. So it just, on this repo, you have all the different steps in order to have a minimum viable cluster working in not enough production, but at least a working cluster. And it takes a lot of things and a lot of steps. And that's just the beginning, because as soon as you have a cluster, you have to manage it. And that's as well where the all tricky stuff is going. So you have to make sure that it's secure. You have to make sure that you have to set up high availability of your application, as well patch when there is a security update. So it's quite still a lot of operations to do. So with that, we have a solution. That's a bit marketing pushy, but the solution is Google Kubernetes Engine. That is the ideal way of managing Kubernetes. And when we look at, as well, the quotation from Kelsey Hightower as well, back in 2015, back in time it was Container Engine and not Kubernetes Engine, he says that it's a cheat code for managing Kubernetes, because a lot of things that are quite time-consuming, let's say, are going to be taken care by Google from that point of view, and literally by Google people. So we're going to check that. I mentioned it. I mentioned that Kubernetes has been launched V1 July 2015, a month after our managed version of Kubernetes has been set up. So the key thing and the key differentiator compared to the industry is that we have 4 years of experience, not only running our own infrastructure, but as well running different customers' infrastructure. So when we look at public, for example, references of people hosting Kubernetes environment at Google Cloud Platform, it's a lot. So for example, Waze, which is now part of Google. The Meetup website, in the French ecosystem, we have Captain, previously Chauffeur Privé, for the ones that knows. King as well. So King is a developer of Candy Crush, the game. Pokemon Go as well, that has been fully deployed on Kubernetes Engine. So the promise is to have a cluster running in a single click. So you won't have to first select your machine, select your storage, define your network topology, all of that. You're just going to do one click and you're going to have your cluster. But what is exactly a Kubernetes cluster? Because we've talked a lot about nodes, pods, but what is exactly a Kubernetes cluster for the ones that are pretty new to that? So that's a cluster. Basically, you have a master and you have different nodes. Nodes are virtual machines that will run your application. In each node, you have a pod, and you're going to have a master that will manage all your cluster, your entire cluster. So we're going to deep dive into the master. When you go with Kubernetes Engine, we're going to take care of it. You won't even see it. You won't even have to manage it. You won't even have to upgrade it. It's going to be taken care of by Google. And when I say it's going to be taken care by Google, it means that it's actually the same SRE team that is working for having 24/7 all Google services running that will take care of your master running. So you won't see them, they won't be in your console, but it's going to be taken care by us. And it's free of charge, so you're not paying for them. So that's kind of as well a good benefit compared to managing your own infrastructure. So you're going to have more ops, and you're going to pay for the machine serving your cluster. So that's kind of the main benefit. Then you have nodes. Nodes, I said, it's virtual machines that will host your different pods that will run your application. And we have what we say node pools. When you're going to manage a cluster, you're going to have different applications running on top of it. You're going to have applications from your data science teams that will need GPU acceleration for machine learning learnings. So with GPU attached, you're going to need nodes with a large amount of CPU and memory. So you're going to be able, in Kubernetes and in GKE, to define node pools, so different type of machines that will host your application. So that's kind of a feature of it. Now I'm going to talk about how easy it is to set up your cluster, and as well how your cluster is going to scale. So that's one thing as well that Pierre-Gilles mentioned. He covered regarding the horizontal pod autoscaler. So we're going to deep dive about the 4 different types of scaling your application on Kubernetes. First, we're going to go to the node auto repair. So when we can see that one node is, for example, not responsive, returning a not ready status, we know that, okay, something is wrong with that node. So what we're going to do, we're going to drain the pods in that node, and we're going to spawn a new pod to your new node to your cluster. So that's as well a basic feature that comes with GKE. So you won't have to do it by yourself and check the real status of your nodes. It's going to be managed by the infrastructure. And that, like all the different features that I'm mentioning, is not for kind of being marketing savvy. It's really because that's the differentiators that have made companies deciding moving to GKE instead of running their own Kubernetes cluster. Second thing is about auto upgrade. I'm not sure like if people did an upgrade of a Kubernetes cluster in the audience, but it can be quite difficult for a couple of reasons. And often it ends up with the cluster being killed and set up a new one with a different version of Kubernetes. That's kind of the reality of a lot of companies. With GKE, it's going to be done seamlessly. You won't see any downtime. We're going to see that later on, but you won't see any downtime, and your master will be upgraded seamlessly. But the key thing is about security updates. So the same way that for the upgrades, for all security patches, you're going to receive them directly without any downtime of your application. So that's kind of a good benefits. And that's why it saves a lot of time for your ops team to move with a managed version of Kubernetes with GKE to not have to do this. So for example, if we look at the recent RunC security vulnerability that happened 2 weeks ago, so everything was patched for customers directly. So that's kind of a key feature. Now we're going to talk about scaling, and after we're going to talk about high availability as well, how you can provide a global application serving all your different customers. But first, your application, before being available globally, it has to scale to the demand. So first, scaling your workloads. So let's look at what Pierre-Gilles mentioned. So you are serving a web application, and you have a lot of customer requesting to access. So based on different metrics, CPU, memory, or even custom metrics, you're going to be able to, Kubernetes will be able, GKE will be able to directly scale new pods of your application in order to manage the different metrics under the throttle of scaling your application. So basically, you are going to deploy more of your application within the defined cluster. So that's kind of the horizontal pod autoscaler, so the HPA. Then we have what we call the vertical pod autoscaler. One thing as well that Pierre-Gilles mentioned, it's sometimes very hard for ops and for developers to know exactly what's going to be the memory and CPU consumption of your application. So you're going to work on a microservice, but how much memory does it need? How much CPU does it need? It's really hard to know, and you're just going to try. It fails, try again, but it's not very fine-tuning. So with the vertical pod autoscaler, Kubernetes will check kind of the behavior of your pod, and we're going to adapt the size of the pod based on the requirement of your application. So that's as well a feature that helps you to size the right way your applications in your cluster. So the two first autoscaler were about scaling your application itself. Now we're going to see that scaling your infrastructure. Because in the two previous scenarios, we were on the same amount of machines. So you set up a cluster with 5 machines. We're going to try to fill those 5 machines. But what happens if we need to schedule another pod, but it's running out of space? So that's where it comes from, the cluster autoscaler. So basic feature. The master will not be able to schedule a new pod in your existing environment. We're going to schedule a new node for serving your application. Adding a new node takes only 2 to 3 minutes on GKE, Google Kubernetes Engine. For people that are dealing with managed service of Kubernetes or anything like this, it's 10 times more. So the time to provision new nodes. So Kubernetes GKE is really good in that way for scaling your application in very short amount of time. And another feature about the type of nodes that will serve your application is about what we call the node auto-provisioning. So that's a new feature that, based on the different workloads, we're going to recommend new type of machines that will serve your and host your pods. So for example, okay, we think you need bigger machine, or you think you need this type of machine that will be better and more efficient in order to scale your application. For example, if we see that you have a cluster and a lot of free space, okay, maybe we can just add another type of machine that will be smaller in your node pool, and we'll use those type of machines in order to scale your application. So those were the 4 different types of scaling your application: 2 for the pods, 2 for the nodes. Now, how we're going to build highly available application. Now that your application is able to scale, how to make sure that everyone can access it globally. So at scale, how you're going to deploy your application. First, you can have what we call the multi-zonal cluster. So for the ones that are just explanation, in the public cloud, you have region that is a group of data center, and inside each region you have a few zones that are fully autonomous regarding energy, disaster recovery, blah, blah, blah. So the idea here is about building and splitting your different workloads into each zone of your region in order to mitigate the risk of having an outage in one zone. So you can just enable the feature, and you're going to have your pods being deployed into different zones in order to have a balance and not having one single point of failure for your application. And the same for the nodes, the same for the masters. So we have what we call regional cluster on GKE. So basically, you're going to have 3 masters into 3 zones, so 1 master per zone. Each master, of course, will scale up based on the demand. As well, so it allows you to have 0 downtime upgrade, because we're going to upgrade 1 master. The 2 other will serve the entire application, and we're going to do a rolling update like this. And it allows you to have 99.95 SLA for the service. So that's really key for deploying high availability application. And as well, it's free of charge. So if you have one master or 3 master, it's the same price, 0. So if you are deploying any application, we strongly advise you to use regional cluster. It will facilitate all the different master upgrade in your Kubernetes environment. And then, once you're going to go global, you're going to need to have what we call the multi-cluster ingress. So for example, you have people Pokemon Go style. Okay, a lot of people are connecting to the platform. You want them to go to the nearest location of the cluster that will serve their application instead of doing the entire world for each call of the service. So that would be stupid. So your user will directly go to the global load balancer, and after we're going to split the traffic to the nearest location for your customers. So that as well allows you to have a highly available application, reducing latency and better customer experience for your end users. I'm not going to go into details into that part, but we're offering you a lot of benefits from moving to like hosting Kubernetes on GCP. The key thing was, the message I deep dive was about scalability, availability of your application. And if you want to do that on Kubernetes, it's fine. It's going to be complicated. If you go on GKE, it's going to be much more easier. So to wrap up, Kubernetes is definitely as adopted by large companies, startups, and also the entire industry. So for example, Red Hat, IBM as well. So it's definitely kind of the future of orchestrating and deploying application. So in one sentence, we can say that Kubernetes is on fire. And we're going to be here, actually, we are a few people from Google Cloud France in the audience to answer any question if you have or to discuss. So I hope it kind of allows you, for people that are quite new to that, what is Kubernetes in a better way, what is a cluster, and also for the ones that are having issues with their own Kubernetes cluster, maybe moving to GKE, that would be easier. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arnaud. Sam, we have time for 2 or 3 questions. Anyone?
Yes, can you talk to us a bit about the Google Hybrid Cloud and when you plan on offering it to people here in Paris?
So the first answer will be, good question. Hybrid cloud, so back in July last year at the Next 18 conference, Google unveiled what is called GKE on-prem. So basically, you're going to be able to deploy and to manage Kubernetes cluster that will be in your existing data center, but the master will be on Google Cloud Platform, and you're going to have all the benefits that I mentioned, but your workloads being deployed locally instead of in the cloud. So that's kind of the explanation of what is a hybrid environment for GCP, for GKE. The status right now, more news in 4 weeks. In 4 weeks, we're going to have the new event Next 19 that will be in San Francisco, and a lot of announcements will be made. Actually, the service GKE on-prem has been released as beta 2 weeks ago. So a few companies you have a lot of criteria and requirements in order to deploy it, but at least it's a beta as of now. But the strategy regarding that will be unveiled in 4 weeks from now. So yeah, strongly advise you to watch the live stream.
Thanks. Any other question in the audience?
A question over there.
That's okay.
Please take it.
Thanks a lot. Do you know if big cloud platforms like Salesforce, ServiceNow use this technology or are running on their own?
Regarding public, so I'm just going to talk about public customer references that we can explain. Yeah. So far, we can see large deployment of Kubernetes. Regarding those particular companies, I cannot disclose anything. But yes, the answer is yes. Large companies running like big industry in the web industry, big companies, are going forward with Kubernetes and are going forward with GKE especially.
So you just cannot say who is
exactly
running on Kubernetes, but they do.
I can just mention the public references, but we have way more bigger deployment.
They don't reinvent the wheel.
No, actually, on Kubernetes, a lot of companies are adopting that first because Kubernetes is, I haven't mentioned, but Kubernetes is a rewriting of what we have internally at Google, which is Borg, that is managing our entire platform. So Kubernetes is another way of doing that in another way. But yeah, companies decide to move to Kubernetes and as well, especially to GKE. So. Why?
Could you explain why?
Well, why? Because it's easier. The short answer is easier. The long answer is they've tried to do their own way, and at a point when it times to scale, it's kind of complicated. So yeah, I cannot say more names, but it's that way.
And it's not their core business.
Exactly as well. But even tech companies that are it's their core business to develop their own application are moving towards Kubernetes in that way as well. So.
Thank you very much. We will have time later.
You can follow up after. Thank you.